I am Tutankhamun. You are looking for a king who changed the world. But I was never that kind of king. I did not build empires. I did not win great wars. I was 9 when they put the crown on my head and the inside stone. For 3,000 years it worked, until one day the sand gave me back. What do you think is left? Now you are here, listening to a boy they tried to forget.
Many pharaohs ruled Egypt. Men who built pyramids. Men who won wars. Men whose names were carved into stone and stayed there for thousands of years. Tutankhamun did none of those things. He ruled for 10 years. He started at 9 and died at 18. He left no great monument with his name on it, no famous battle, no reshaped empire. In fact, the men who came after him worked very hard to make sure his name disappeared from history entirely. For 3,000 years, it worked. Then a British archaeologist found a staircase in the sand. To understand Tutankhamun, you first have to understand his father. Akhenaten, Pharaoh of Egypt, husband of Nefertiti, father of Tutankhamun, looked at 3,000 years of Egyptian religion and decided it was wrong. All of it. Every god, every temple, every ritual that had held Egypt together since before memory. He closed the temples. He ordered the gods' names scraped from walls across the country. He built a brand new city in the middle of the desert, Amarna, and moved the entire government there. Egypt would worship one god only, a sun disk called Aten. No animal-headed gods, no underworld, no Osiris weighing hearts against feathers. Just the disk, just the light, just him. The priests were furious. The people were confused. The economy suffered. The army grew restless. Akhenaten didn't care. He renamed himself. He renamed his children. The boy who would become Tutankhamun was born with a different name, Tutankhaten, the living image of Aten. Then Akhenaten died, and a 9-year-old inherited everything his father had broken. 9 years old. The throne room was not built for a 9-year-old. The throne was not the right size. The crown was too heavy. The people standing around him waiting for decisions were adults who had spent their entire lives in politics and war and the complicated machinery of running a kingdom. And a child sat in the middle of all of it. He was not alone. Nobody would have left him alone. 2 men stood closest to the throne. The first was old, patient, a man who had seen everything. The Grand Vizier, possibly Tutankhamun's own grandfather. He had survived Akhenaten's entire reign through careful silence, never agreeing too loudly, never disagreeing at all. He had waited for the storm to pass. And now, with a child on the throne, he was exactly where he had always intended to be. The second was Horemheb, commander of the entire Egyptian military, a man who had spent years watching Akhenaten dismantle the country with barely concealed fury, who had kept the army intact through the chaos, who now, with a 9-year-old wearing the crown, held more real power than anyone in Egypt. These 2 men made the decisions. Tutankhamun was the face, but faces grow up. And the first real decision that carried his name, the most important one his entire reign would ever produce, was already being made. He brought the gods back. The temples reopened. The priests returned. The statues were repaired. The capital moved back to Thebes. And the boy changed his own name, from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun. The living image of Aten became the living image of Amun. He gave Egypt its gods back. He was 9 years old. The years passed. Tutankhamun grew. He learned to ride chariots. He hunted. His tomb contained leather armor and weapons that showed real signs of use, not ceremonial objects made for burial, but things that had actually been worn and held and carried into the field. he had a wife, Ankhesenamun, a girl who had grown up in Akhenaten's court, who understood better than almost anyone what it meant to live under a father who had changed everything. She was also his half-sister, almost certainly his full sister, and she had previously been married to his father, Akhenaten, which would make her his stepmother as well. The royal family tree had stopped being a tree some generations ago. It had become something closer to a single trunk growing in circles. He had daughters with Ankhesenamun, 2 of them, both born too soon, too small, too fragile to survive. Their mummified bodies were found inside his tomb, 2 tiny coffins buried with him in the greatest treasure ever discovered. One of the girls had a severe spinal defect. Neither had drawn a breath. He was still young, still learning what it meant to be a king and not just a symbol of one. And then he died, 18 years old. Nobody saw it coming. His tomb was not ready. Every pharaoh had a tomb built during their lifetime. Years of careful work, designed to be finished before it was needed. Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings was unfinished. The paint on the walls was still wet when they sealed the doors. Objects inside had been made for other people, names scratched out, replaced with his. Everything had been done in a hurry, because nobody had expected this. Now, here is the part about Tutankhamun that the golden mask does not prepare you for. He had never been healthy. His parents were siblings, brother and sister. This was not unusual for Egyptian royalty. Keeping bloodlines pure had been standard practice for generations. The intention was to preserve the divine blood. What it actually did, over time, was concentrate every genetic weakness the family carried until there was nowhere left for those weaknesses to hide. Tutankhamun had a clubfoot so severe he could barely walk without pain, a curved spine, a pronounced overbite, an asymmetrical face, extremely narrow hips, what appears to have been epilepsy, bone disease throughout his feet. Over 100 walking sticks were found in his tomb, more than any other pharaoh in history. The boy behind the golden mask, the calm, perfect, eternally composed face that has become one of the most recognized images in human history, spent most of his short life in physical pain, moving through the world on a body that had been failing him since birth. He also had malaria, multiple strains of it, still detectable in his DNA 3,000 years after his death. And sometime in his 18th year, he broke his leg, a fracture in his left thigh that showed no signs of healing, meaning it happened very close to the end. His body, already fighting malaria, already worn down by a lifetime of accumulated illness, had nothing left to give. That is the most likely explanation for his death. A boy who had been sick his whole life broke his leg, and that was enough, although not everyone accepts it. In 1968, scientists X-rayed his skull. They found 2 bone fragments loose inside it. The murder theory arrived and never fully left. A blow to the back of the head, a calculated assassination. The 2 men who had the most to gain from the boy king's death, Ai and Horemheb, both of whom would take the throne after him, had motive, access, and the opportunity that comes from standing close to power for a very long time. Later CT scans examined those fragments more carefully. The conclusion: they had broken loose during the mummification process itself, not from a blow during life. The murder theory, at least that version of it, was quietly set aside. But something else remained. After Tutankhamun died, his widow Ankhesenamun did something extraordinary. She wrote a letter to the king of Egypt's greatest enemy, the Hittites, and asked him to send one of his sons to marry her. the letter still exists. In it, she writes that she is afraid, that she does not want to marry a servant, that her husband is dead, and she has no son, and she is alone, and she does not know what to do. The Hittite king read the letter and sent his son. The prince died before he reached Egypt. The circumstances were never recorded. Akhenaten disappeared from history shortly after. She married Ai, the old man who had stood beside her husband since the beginning. Then she vanished from the records entirely. Nobody knows what happened to her. Ai ruled for 4 years. Then Horemheb took the throne. And what Horemheb did next is the reason most people had never heard of Tutankhamun before 1922. He erased him. Tutankhamun's name was chiseled off every wall, every statue, every monument. His constructions were claimed by others and renamed. The official lists of pharaohs, the records that determined who history would remember, skipped over him entirely. The capital was moved from Thebes to Memphis. New buildings were constructed directly over his burial site in the Valley of the Kings. Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ai, all of them gone. The Amarna period removed from the record, as if it had never happened. Here is the irony that history took 3,000 years to reveal. Because Tutankhamun had been so thoroughly erased, his tomb was considered insignificant. Grave robbers who had spent generations systematically emptying the Valley of the Kings barely noticed it. It was robbed twice in ancient times, but both times the robbers took relatively little, and the tomb was resealed. The man who tried to make Tutankhamun disappear forever accidentally ensured that his tomb survived. Howard Carter arrived in Egypt in 1891 at 17 years old. No formal training, a talent for drawing. He had come to copy tomb paintings for archaeologists who needed an artist. He stayed for the rest of his life. Over the following decades, he learned the Valley of the Kings the way a person learns a house they have lived in for years. Every corner, every shadow, every place where the rock changed texture. He became convinced of something that most of his colleagues considered wishful thinking. There was a tomb in that valley that had never been properly found. A forgotten minor pharaoh whose name appeared occasionally in scattered inscriptions, but whose burial place remained unknown. He found a wealthy English patron named Lord Carnarvon and began digging. Season after season, year after year, hundreds of Egyptian workers filling baskets with rubble by hand and carrying them out of the valley on a borrowed railway track, day after day, in the heat. Nothing. By the summer of 1922, Carnarvon had had enough. He invited Carter to his estate in England and told him it was over. The money was gone. Other Egyptologists were already making jokes about Carter's obsession. It was time to stop. Carter asked for one more season. Just one. Carnarvon said yes. On the 4th of November 1922, a young Egyptian boy working on Carter's team was clearing rubble from beneath some ancient workers' huts near the entrance to another tomb. His tool struck something solid in the ground, a step cut into the bedrock. By the following morning, a staircase had emerged. 16 steps leading down into the earth, ending at a sealed door covered in ancient plaster and marked with seals. Carter stopped the work immediately. He sent a telegram to Carnarvon in England. At last have made wonderful discovery in valley. Magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Carnarvon arrived 2 weeks later. On the 26th of November, Carter picked up a chisel, the same one his grandmother had given him for his 17th birthday, 30 years earlier, and made a small hole in the upper left corner of the sealed door. He held a candle up to the opening. The flame flickered. Air moved past him from inside. 3,000-year-old air, finding its way out for the first time. Carter pressed his eye to the hole and looked. Gold everywhere. Animals, statues, chariots. Objects piled to the ceiling, catching the candlelight in the dark. Carnarvon stood in the tunnel behind him. "Can you see anything?" Carter looked for a long time before he answered. "Yes. Wonderful things. They sealed the hole, locked the wooden gate they had placed over the first doorway, climbed on their donkeys, and rode home in the dark." That night, Carter sat down and wrote in his diary. His handwriting, usually precise and controlled, was unsteady on the page. The next day they opened the door completely. 4 rooms. The first, the antechamber, was packed from floor to ceiling. Golden chariots, ivory chests, alabaster jars, thrones inlaid with gold and precious stones. 2 life-size statues of Tutankhamun, standing guard on either side of a sealed inner door. Every object exactly where it had been placed the day the door was sealed, more than 3,000 years earlier. Carter photographed each object before touching it. Then the next, then the next. Documenting the antechamber alone took 3 months. On the 16th of February, 1923, they opened the inner sealed door. Behind it were 4 gilded shrines, each nested inside the previous one like a series of boxes. Inside the innermost shrine was a stone sarcophagus. Inside the sarcophagus were 3 coffins. The first 2 were gilded wood, covered in spells and images. The third was solid gold. Inside the golden coffin was a boy, 18 years old, a clubfoot, a broken leg, malaria in his blood, a body that had been failing him since the day he was born. On his face, a golden mask, calm, still, perfect, staring out from under 3,000 years of darkness. Lord Carnarvon never saw the mummy. He died 5 months after the tomb was opened. A mosquito bite on his cheek became infected. Blood poisoning followed. He died in Cairo in the early hours of the morning on the 5th of April, 1923. At the exact moment of his death, every light in Cairo went out simultaneously. In England, at his family estate, his dog let out a single howl and dropped dead. The press called it the curse of the Pharaohs. 12 years after the tomb was opened, 50 of the 58 people who had been present at the discovery were still alive. Carter himself, who had spent more time inside the tomb than anyone, lived another 16 years and died quietly at home in London in 1939. No written curse was ever found anywhere inside the tomb. But the story spread anyway. Some things survive facts. Tutankhamun became the most famous pharaoh in history. Not because of what he built. Not because of battles won, or empires expanded, or monuments raised. He was 9 when he started, and dead at 18. He never had time to do any of those things. He became famous because the people who tried to erase him failed. His tomb survived. His face survived. The golden mask, calm and perfect, staring out from under 3,000 years of darkness into the cameras and the museum lights and the eyes of every person who has stood in front of it since. The boy who was supposed to be forgotten became the one everyone remembers. The men who chiseled his name off walls, nobody knows their faces.